You are listening to the Apocalyptic Education Podcast. I'm your host, Tiffani Marie, and a little later, the good Dr. Kenjus Watson will join me for our interview segment. Join us in a final farewell to schools in hopes that we might embrace its afterlife and implications for Black and other Indigenous frameworks of wellness. Well, we're here. Somehow we're here.
We made it back.
We made it back for another season of Apocalyptic Education. This is a 4-year anniversary. Yesterday. 4-year anniversary of us posting about it.
That's right.
On Facebook.
Uh-huh.
We had just, some months prior, I'm not even going to get into too much detail, but some months prior, we had an very interesting experience with editors.
Yes, I recall.
We had this great piece that we wanted to publish somewhere.
Uh-huh.
And it was Apocalyptic Ed, this piece. And we'll talk about this probably in a different episode, but some interesting things happened there. And then we didn't publish with them. Put this thing out. This is real. Get that phone on silent. And here we are. We put an article out. Folks wasn't messing with us for a little bit. And then it started, getting some traction. Turned it into a podcast. Audiobook and a podcast. Did one season and here we are. Naturally. Here we are. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I mean, when you frame it in that way about the timeline, we were looking at this last night. The cover for that announcement of the piece that was in the Rootwork Journal had a picture of a tree. It was actually outside of my uncle's house in Salem, Oregon, and the sky was orange. There's no filtering, nothing was done to the photograph because the world was on fire. At least our part of the world was on fire.
Yes.
Where I was living down in unceded Tongva ancestral lands in Los Angeles, up to here in the Bay Area, all the way up the coast into what is referred to as Oregon. And it's a trip to be reflecting on that 4 years after the fact. There aren't any visible signs of smoke here where we're at, but I think that in some ways we're sitting in a time where we experienced a lot of what we had maybe thought we were headed towards, and yet here we are talking in the second iteration of this podcast. So I'm feeling really grateful to be sitting with you at this time in this season, and you had an idea for this second season of Apocalyptic Ed.
I wanted the whole season to be predicated on this idea, but we're not going to do that.
Well,
but I'll tell the story.
Tell them about the idea of this story.
So check this out. So I'm saying it to you, but it's also the film crew here and Justin. So, I mean, I'm telling the story to all y'all, really, because Kenjus has heard the story already.
Yeah.
So I'm walking. I think I had Kashmir. We're on a walk. I think she was in a stroller. I'm pretty sure, because I was talking to her. But I might have been talking to myself. That's very much possible, too. But we're walking. Yeah, it was Kashmir. And I'm like, look, there's a parrot. There's a parrot on what are those called? The electric, how we communicate, the wires on the street. There's a parrot. No, the parrot's on the car first. It's on the car. It's in front of us. And I'm like, whoa, there's a parrot. And then the parrot flies up to the wires. And the first thought I had, because I called you, right? the first thought I had, but I don't know if I had the realization on the call with you. I was like, a parrot got out. That was my first thought. It was like, whoa, this parrot got out. It was beautiful. It was this vibrant blue, and it had like orange colors in there. That was on the call where I came to the realization, or was it before?
I think you came to the realization after you had the thought and called me about the thought that you had, right? Or
I had the realization after the call?
No, you had the realization.
Oh, prior, and then I called you.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so y'all, I'm thinking about this parrot, and then it hit me that my only understanding of parrots is that they belong in cages.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as I saw it, that was the first thought is, oh my God, somebody's parrot is out.
Right.
And I'm embarrassed now to say this, but I was worried about the parrot's well-being because it wasn't taken care of anymore.
Sure.
And then I was talking to a homie about it, Joe, and she was reminding me that parrots fly all around on their own as like potentially free beings. And it messed me up because my whole understanding and orientation of this bird is a caged being.
Mm-hmm.
And that in its free state, the only thing I could think of was getting it back to its cage or its person.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, oh, that's Black people.
Yes.
Oh, that's Black people.
Yes. Yeah. And we had lots of ideas about other experiences that with our four-legged relatives that remind us of Black people as well. That remind us of ourselves.
Yeah.
But I remember my response to that story was my own about parrots.
Yes.
Which I think became the kind of hook for us for this season. And so we had like done ceremony, Danielle and I, my partner, to bring us, our second child into the world, or we wanted to do ceremony to bring him into the world. There's another story about animals I'll bring up around that ceremony, but I remember us being on a mountain and meditating about what his name would be, or who they would be, and part of it was naming him in some ways after both my father and my uncle Ken, and another name came to mind when we were meditating. That was Anansi, this trickster, passageway, doorway figure, spider from the Akan people's medicine that has traveled across the diaspora. A lot of different realities around Anansi, but he was very late in our home birthing experience. We thought he was going to be coming into the world earlier in July, like July 7th, I think his due date was, or their due date was. And by the time we get to the 19th, we're kind of concerned. We might not be able to have this home birth. And that day, I was just telling you, I went to the Botanica, I got some incense and actually got some preparation materials, because we were going to pray. We did not want to go to a hospital to give birth to Anansi. And when I got back to our house, this is in east of Los Angeles, heading out almost not to the Inland Empire, but in Monrovia, Pasadena area. I get back there and come into our front yard, and there were parrots sitting on these wires all around our house, just squawking down.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. Never had seen anything like that. There were parrots that fly around Pasadena. I don't know how they came to be in the area. I don't think that they're native to that area of California, but it's understood that they're there. They're rarely that east, or I've never seen them that east. And the fact that they were just sitting in front of our house, squawking down, and then that the next day, Anansi was born. I also thought there was a snake in our house. I'm very afraid of snakes. But it wasn't a snake. It was like a salamander lizard, but also was hilarious because that's what Anansi would be, like kind of a trickster. So we had these like stories of both magic, freedom, flight, and I think connection to our people's experiences, the aesthetics of our people's experiences, and what comes up in people's minds. And then other themes around what it means to let go of some of that as we come here on the anniversary. That was on my mind while I was thinking about your story about parrots, that we have other stories about parrots.
And all of them coexist. All of them are. I mean, and I don't know where you want to go with it, but I think I had so much embarrassment around the perception that I had been fed about these beings, and that they talk in English. And that they have probably their own means of communicating.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I knew, and they belong to somebody.
Right.
So what do we do with all that? What's your suggestions on kind of? I mean, I wanted to go all over the place. I wanted to think about the role of parrots in film. We're not gonna do that. But what do we do with these two stories around our experiences with these parrots?
Yeah, I think that we had talked about this. To me, it's really implicative of a kind of science of maroonage. And I was hoping we could talk about that and see where it takes us to, both this conversation and maybe even thinking about some of the work I know you've been doing recently and around what it means to engage with death more intentionally and with more grounding.
Yeah.
And see where we land. I know that the conventional understanding of maroons is these are people who run away from a situation where they are experiencing enslavement and go and generate new life pathways elsewhere.
Yeah.
And part of the challenge is it's a spiritual one, and I think it's a philosophical one and a personal one. That idea that parrots exist beyond our relationship to them as domesticators is what I heard in your story, that there are people, there are these beings who we teach to speak English and hold in cages, and their existence is reliant, really there's a a reliance upon our relationship with them. So there's this codependency, and yet there are clearly parrots or birds who have resisted that or existed outside of that relationship of capture. And to me, that's that the fact that it's happening at the same time is kind of the concept, I think, of maroonage or maroon science. So I'm interested in what are the groundings that might lead towards one inhabiting more maroonage or less, or maybe that's not even the right ways to think about it.
Well, I think you jump in with this term maroon science, and maybe the episode is going to lend itself to a definition, but what is that? Or how are you understanding it? Why are you even drawn to that?
There's 4 different ways into that, but so in the work that we do, we say, even on our materials, I love your framing of what is apocalyptic education. It's about Black sustainability in all the ways we could imagine.
Yeah.
And in our world, we framed that we have empirical evidence that suggests that the experiences of Black people inside these places we call schools lead to deteriorating or worsened life outcomes, whether it be at the physiological level or biological level, or monetarily or whatnot. We say this compromise that we're making within schools does not lead to our ultimate wellness. We're sacrificing that, and we crouch a lot of that in the data, as you were, of our work around telomere length. It's somewhat what our work has been, how we have come to be known. And there's criticism of that, I think, from a number of different spaces, around what kind of information has a prime position in making an argument, how we even go about thinking about knowledge from Western standpoints. is there space, or need there be space for that, for our people who were not thinking about the world in that way?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole host of people who have done, I think, a really powerful job of challenging the very basis of those assumptions. And they get broadly, I don't know if it's by their own desire, but they've certainly been placed in some ways into a field of what's called native science or indigenous science, and or traditional ecological knowledge systems, which are essentially knowledge systems of indigenous people across the globe that have sustained them for millennia, that are based on observations made over millennia, and that are grounded in their ways of being and knowing. And you compare that and contrast it with Western science, which is, of course, really extractive, exploitative, antagonistic. It's attempting to go to the smallest possible denominator of any given phenomenon, and then make a very careful statement or question. And then you can compare that to like what other folks have done around like abolition science, which is saying Western science is racist. You know, it has empiricism. Its empiricism is based in imperialism. And I saw fugitive science, some of the work, fugitive science that tracks the work of some Black folks who have said that they're going to, by virtue of the way they practice science, they're going to challenge the racism of Western science. But we've been in conversations or spaces where our indigeneity, our practices, our ways of being.
Your what?
Your
indigeneity.
Those are not understood, because of as we both have talked about, so much of what anti-Blackness is it's a inability to see ourselves as ourselves, or that was at least the attempt, right? And so I'm interested in the practices, the ways of being, the life protocols that our people have always engaged in, prior to, during, and I hope, even beyond this moment of capture, that are our own, knowledge systems, sciences.
I hear that. I'm thinking back to my parrot experience of what is it like? What does it mean to see a parrot as a parrot, or a Black person as a Black person, when the notion of who you are, the notion of what it means to be Black, is very much about being captured, being taught the English language, and being taught to exist under that paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was thinking about that relationship to Black people, like, it's super, like, can people look at a Black person and see freedom in the way that I couldn't look at the parrot and see the parrot as a parrot? The parrot was an escaped being. Mm-hmm. And so when Black people are, quote, being free, do we still see them as escaped?
I think yes. I think yes. Yeah, but I think that whole idea that we're defined by this moment of capture that overdetermines all the different ways that we can even imagine freedom. That's why I'm so interested in maroonage, because we were talking about this elder that I heard from earlier who was describing rites of passage. Yeah. And he was asked by a younger person, people our age, like, how do you use rites of passage practice to counter this reality of anti-Blackness and all that comes with that, all these outcomes that come with anti-Blackness? And the elder was like, I don't know if I like the word counter. A rites of passage is really about aligning ourselves to our life force, our spirit, our life course, the terrain that we are navigating, and our life cycle. The sort of sun rising, midday, and sun setting of any given project. That's what rites of passage is about. It's about preparing young people to essentially inhabit their purpose. And so rites of passage predates what we know of as capture, or the moment of capture, and it will exceed beyond it. It's not so much a response or reaction, but it is a way of being. And I imagine and you push us on this, but I imagine that Maroons, conventionally understood Maroons who still exist in a conventional way in like Suriname and Jamaica and other spaces where plantations existed, that they were essentially engaging in their practices and protocols of rites of passage, and they had to leave the plantation. But you challenge us and say it's not just these people in these spaces that we call maroon villages, but it's also in the everyday actions, ways of being and knowing that Black people inhabit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. Is like, is maroonage a place? Is it action? Is it a way of being? Like, because is that when I look at that parrot and see an escaped animal, is it free? Because that's my perception of it. Is it still free? Is it still a parrot? And I'm saying with Black people particularly, you can think what you want to think about yourself. Right. You can be a part of the practices that you value deeply and have your namaste, ashe moments.
Yeah.
And then if you are still perceived as somebody who ran away, that reality becomes incredibly present and dictates your freedom. Namely police, namely schools, namely our involvement in these spaces. It's like, yes, they have the perception that that's someone who ran away or got away. Maybe if you like think about a kid who leaves the classroom and goes outside to go meditate or sit in the garden, which I've heard countless stories. It's like they're not like, oh, that's the beautiful descendant practice of a powerful people, and they know what they want for themselves and their bodies. They're like, what are you doing?
Yeah. If you do that too much, you're practicing school refusal, which is a mental health deficiency similar to opposition. What is it? Opposite defiant disorder or
drapetomania?
Drapetomania, essentially, right? That you're unfree. You're talking about materiality, which brings me another question.
This sounds too academic.
Okay, well, let me bring it down. Let's bring it down. Down to the ground where we should be, out of this mess, right? Yeah. So we're gonna go. We're in that same space. We're talking about doing ceremony for, Anansi, but that was also the same time we were doing ceremony around like our wedding ceremony, and we were hiking, and Danielle says, "Hey, I'm worried about bears because there are all these signs about bears." She's from Ohio, What does she know about bears? Like I'm from a place where there's mountains named after bears, all this stuff. I was not worried about bears. No. And we go into the forest, we do our ceremony. On our way out, I see a bear. And
of course you did.
Right. Like as far as a little bit further than you are from me.
Yeah.
And I grab Danielle's hand, I say, okay, don't move, don't run. That's what I think. Yeah. Don't run. Because that bear could get us. And she, all the color leaves her face. And we start trying to walk. And I, in a stereotypical sense, like I step on a twig and the bear turns around, sees us and goes, "Oh!" Right? God, the bear is so racist. I ran into an anti-Black bear. But we walk slowly past it.
Was it a brown bear?
It was a black bear, of course. We walk slowly past it and sprint away. And then I read about black bear attacks, and there are so few of them. And, it's that bear's in its home. We're not in our home in that space. And yet my immediate response to the bear was fear. And I also remember thinking, I wish I had a gun or at least bear spray, something to protect ourselves from this being who represents a near and present danger by virtue of their embodiment. And I think about that in relationship to Black people, that is our reality. Either that or it's the other way, right? We're Winnie the Pooh, where they just want to cuddle and, dress us up and, decorate their house with us, I guess, give us to their children or whatever. So it's either way, right? Negrophobia or negrophilia.
Give us to their children. Oh, God.
I'm saying.
I hear you.
But I think that dealing with that reality, I think about that bear often, like does that bear think about us? I mean, well, like we went back to our cabin, there's a bear skin rug. There's bear stuff on the wall. I don't think that bear has human skin rugs. I don't think it has any human, iconography on its wall, but we were innately worried about it. So I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm just saying that there's a way that probably that bear was living where it understood the reality of its threat, right? But was still living its life and doing what it needs to do, right? It wasn't going to our spaces, and I don't think it would want to come to our spaces. So I think about that in relationship to us, about making those spaces more available, which is what I think our work is kind of about.
Making it more available. Say more about that.
Making the possibility of dealing with the material reality as it is, right? Like, we have to eat. We need to house ourselves. We need to be able to gather. And we rely just not by default, but we have been conditioned and coerced and forced to rely upon our captors to provide those, the pathways to those necessities. And I think that our work could be centered around inhabiting or cultivating or creating possibilities for sustainability of our life: food, shelter, clothing, gathering spaces, as you said, like love making, art making, being with each other, that marginalize, that make so small this place, the state, and beyond its impact or its reach in our life. But that requires a whole lot more energy on not necessarily compromising with this place. A lot more energy on creating, and as you often say, practicing the other ways,
So we're both types of parrots, right? And many others, Black people. We're the ones that there's a perception of us when we start talking. People are like, whoa, there's that, right? The mind blown. And then we're the parrots that showed up to your house to support, I'm guessing, in the rites of passage ceremony that y'all would engage in. How would you describe those parrots?
What, those parrots that showed up?
Yep. Or those Black people?
Well, they remind me of my mom. They remind me of you. They remind me of my sisters, my partner, my children. So much of my children. There's an innate attentiveness to what is needed in the moment. No one trained those parrots to come to the house where a baby needed to be sung into this world. I don't think that'd be really wild to find human.
That'd be dope. If I sent them all along.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, there's a service to send parrots to people's houses.
They're in relationship with the earth. They were doing their work. And I think what I mean by you or my mom or my sisters or my children or my partner or these other people in our lives, it's that, they exist in a place called Pasadena, and the history or story around them is that some were brought there and they escaped, and they've basically marooned there. And yet they are singing their song regardless of the conditions of entrapment that may even befall some of their own kind. And I wonder, if the parrot that you met really did get free, or if it was one of those that was in their practice. And I actually don't think it matters a great deal, right? They're inhabiting that space. And the challenge actually, I think, is on us. We're both, right? The challenge is the thought that came to your mind.
We're always both.
Right.
Or all of them. Yeah.
How did that parrot get free? It's like we do that to each other a lot. And I think we're being invited, I feel like, a deep invitation in this season of my life to not indict the autonomy of other people, but to celebrate and where I can, learn from protocols that could be applied to my life and the lives of people I love that lead towards greater autonomy, greater self-determination, and sovereignty.
That's tough. This young person I used to work with, they were online posting about hustling and how people make their money. And this person was like, however, I don't judge how you make your money, how you move, even if it involves blank. And I'm not going to say what blank is, but it's a very physically violent, spiritually violent way of making money.
Sure.
And I think to them, they see that as a means towards sustainability to get free. Or we can think about representation and seats at the table and certain accommodations that people make to kind of move into high places. I'll just say that.
Right.
And people also see that as means towards sustainability, and that we're all those types of parrots.
Okay.
You kind of follow where I'm going
with
here?
You. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is that any of my business anymore? What's the line of if I aspire to stay in the space of the parrot who showed up to y'all house, and that's my aspiration, is it head down into that work? Because so much of my work typically was, I'm not even going to stay in this metaphor analogy, but typically my work was like critiquing people who I believe are doing very violent things to stay afloat. So I just have curiosity around your thoughts on that.
And being paid to do it.
And being paid very well.
Right. And being paid to do that.
Yeah.
So I think it's all this, it's, you know, like this is not metaphorical. I want to be very clear. We're not talking about metaphors. I mean, yes, the parrots and the sort of animal relationships, they might be seen as metaphor, which is also interesting. We're talking about native science because metaphors are a part of how our people have always done what we call science or what they call science. So we've always used stories to understand. But putting that aside, there are true stories and historical realities of people who are literally trying to escape the plantation and go elsewhere. And they run into literal people who believe that the best way, I'm talking about other Africans, the best way that I can get free is by getting closer to the captors and getting more influence that they would grant me. Meritorious manumissions, more and more freedom that they grant me. And that will allow me to get me and mine out.
Yeah,
right?
We both have PhDs.
Right. And then there's people who have been critical of that the whole time.
Yeah.
And would find their own ways away from that. So I don't see it as there's probably some kind of like interaction between those two. They probably are kind of the same people sometimes, right? And if we are inhabiting a space where we both agree, the biggest difference between then and now is, as Derek Bell would say, like a more sophisticated means of doing the plantation to us. It's just more hidden. Then we are. I would take that the cue from the past and say we're still in that moment. Maybe it's to keep our head down, but if I'm living in my rights, if I'm following my protocols, then I imagine if those people who are trying to climb and get closer and closer to the seats of power become a threat, then I would have within me, or we would have within us in our village, our practices, a way of guarding against that, you know? So there were maroon villages that did encounter slave armies. Imagine that conundrum, right? You're living in the hills. Your people have escaped generations or so. And who do they send to fight you? Are people who are really your family, that you ran away from in the past, but they're coming to capture or kill you. That is I think a reality too, right? Whether there are,
so you got to stay ready.
I think that's
because that's always a option.
Does that get at any of your question?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, directly. I'm thinking about, I think where I am right now is I'm just so tired of the lens that had been given to me or gifted to me or throughout my studies how to understand something, how to look at it. And there's this element that we've been talking about recently in terms of spirit and spirituality, and how that weaves itself into this larger narrative around race and power. And that's what's complicating this for me a little bit. And it's always there. Like racism, I think is a very spiritual thing. I think colonialism is spirit. But I also have been taught to approach it in a very, very particular way. I think a lot of people who have mentored us have encouraged us to go further and further in. Given what we talk about, they're just like, they've encouraged us to go further into the plantation, closer and closer to our captors, if I can be real. And so that's hard to sit with. And I'm thinking about how I use the rest of my days. And I've been in conversation. I guess we're always in conversation with something. But I've largely been in conversation with, I've been in a very specific type of conversation that has had implications for how I understand and see the world. Whereas I want to stay in conversation, but I want to be in conversation with something else, with other entities and ways of being. Because this tug of war of like, am I in the field? Am I on the plantation? Am I around the plantation? I'm just feeling called towards something else right now. But that doesn't change the fact that that threat is there, even as I'm feeling called towards something else.
Always been there, though.
Like I can be very free and be captured.
It's always been there. I think I hear you, and I want to, I guess, honor and uplift it, because I don't think that our work is suggesting that we stay at the level of analyzing and contending with racism or anti-Blackness until everyone comes to a similar space of understanding. I think we began this 4 years ago by suggesting that whatever we needed to do, it wasn't going to be in these spaces, but that could also be fluid in what we mean by these spaces, you know? So I guess I'm wondering for you, where do you think you're headed? And
I was going to ask you the same thing.
Okay, well, do we think that any of that has to do, because we're at the beginning of this season, I'm like, well, man, we've had like some academic talk. We're having magic talk.
It's irritating to me.
What do we do about it? The
academic aspect is so irritating in my body. And that's like what's flipping me out.
Where are you feeling it in your body?
Important question. In my chest, tightness that always comes around anxiety. I guess primarily in my chest. Yeah, physiological response. And I'm like, I know I don't want to toss that. I don't want to be done with it. But my body is saying something so different in 2024 than it was saying in 2020 around how I embody my reality, or even what is real. But I'm putting it back on you first, of like, where are you? And like, where are you in terms of where are you being called toward in terms of your calling? And like, what does that look like right now? Because I think we can come back and connect that to maroon science.
You know, when I sent that picture to you 4 years ago, my uncle was fairly sick, and he would be gone a little over a year after that. He would transition. But in the time between I sent that and the time between we were sort of having our celebration for him, for his homegoing, he visited a group of people that I'd connected with who we were calling ourselves Wade in the Water. It was like a Black men and masculine identifying group trying to do healing work based on something you had said about this very area, right? Of like young children who had been pimping other children. I remember that was like the impetus for our group. And so the desire was to, what if we could embody a different way of being in masculinity, in that was attending to both healing for ourselves and for our communities, that was interruptive of children preying on other children, you know, and harming other children. And so my uncle came to that group, and we had done ceremony with him, myself, my mom, my partner, his wife, after we sort of understood that he was going to transition. So he came to this group after that. And the group, you know, he said a few things. We probably will like have some segment of him saying this on his podcast, but essentially that he had to be a different animal every day of his life, going to work, existing, and that was part and parcel of what had harmed him over time, and that he wanted to be closer to himself, without having to make those adjustments, and wanted that for us as a group of masculine identifying people, and that he had said he had a powerful experience. That experience was the ceremony in the space, the ritual essentially, and that he was looking to have more. And I always saw that as a like, oh, we were too late, you know. But I think that as I'm understanding some of the work around death care and the work we're doing with people who are desiring to leave this place, we call suicide prevention, or it's called suicide prevention by others. I don't know if we call it that, maybe suicide work, or that I think where I'm headed, or where I feel called to, are to sit with the ceremonies and rituals of people who are leaving this place, whether we want them to or not, and going to another place, and not seeing, like, doing that for my own learning.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's part of me that definitely wants to leave, you know, and leave, whether it be the state or leave, you know, these different, this different way that we have to do a lot of the work that we have to do. At times in my life, I've wanted to leave life, you know, as we know it. And I think there's a lot to learn from the continuation of that practice, of people who don't necessarily become numb to everyone assuming that they should belong in a cage, that instead just, regardless, desire to fly, desire to leave. I think there's a lot of lessons for us to sit with these 4 years after that, because for them, something's already died, and they, whatever rituals they've done, they've acknowledged its death. They're not going to a place of death looking for life. They're looking for something else. And I think that there's lessons for me personally, but there's also, hopefully in this season, lessons for the community or collective that feel called to engage us in this space. That's where I feel like I'm headed in general in life, with children who are seemingly forgetting their previous life, and I still remember it. I'm like, I'm having to let go of who my daughter was when she was 2.
Wow.
Now she's 5.
Wow.
You know, I hold that. She doesn't even remember, you know, overtly.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of releasing of who I thought I was, what I thought life would be. And I'm interested in sitting with people who are doing rituals around that release and around the cultivation of what's after that.
Ashe to that. Yeah, I mean, it's such an important reflection, and it's reminding me of how much we don't have rites of passage ceremonies, especially in adulthood. Of just even what we're doing right now, of reflecting on where we were 4 years from ago to now. I think we think about people's academic pieces. You know, there's a lot of disowning of people. There's a lot of trashing of people and how they wrote maybe 4 years prior. And this ceremony right now is really powerful for me in that it's a beautiful honoring of just transitions.
Mm-hmm.
I think I kind of want to stay on that train for a little bit because I was mentored in that, just like critique, find, dismiss, because I can't believe they said that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe, and when people are writing now, it's just like so much fear around putting things out. So much of people's writing, I feel like, in the academy is really, they have all these critics in the room as they write, with them. They might be physically alone, but they have all these critics there. And they're just every paragraph, they're trying to respond as opposed to writing where they are. And there being a culture of grace around, this is where you are. This is where we are. This is how I'm understanding and moving through the world right now. And that if we honored seasons changing, if we honored transitions, if we honored death, we would understand that where we were 4 years ago, hopefully, is not where we are today. So when I think about, we put out Apocalyptic Education 4 years ago, and we were pumped about, we were so excited. We were so young, and excited about this revelation that we very much still stand behind, I think, in many ways. Allowing, death to do its thing, the inevitable. But I particularly at that time used death as theory, as a symbol, as a metaphor, and for making sense of what we were a part of, what we were captured into. And now I've transitioned into death work, quite literally. And I, of course, with that, and I know we'll come back to that. We'll come back to those lessons learned in other episodes this season. But I think one of the bigger lessons that's sitting with me is the beauty of it and the sacredness that's attached to that literal transition from this world and any other symbolic transitions. And the power of what happens when we create ceremony around it. And we bring intention to it and we're not running from it. So that's where I am. Over, very recently have transitioned into becoming a death doula. And, the training that I went to was really intense because they were saying a lot of the people were waiting for their certification and their whatever type of, pardoning or whatever was going to come to determine that you are now a death doula.
Right.
I was like, okay, what do I give to the state? I was still thinking about this credentialing in relationship to being legitimate by the state.
You're gonna put the certificate on your wall behind your desk, like your degrees.
Well, my PhD, the last I remember was in between. It was in an envelope in between dressers.
Yeah, I don't know where mine is.
I don't know where it is.
It might be in Las Vegas.
And this is no knock at people that have it boldly framed. But the death doula certificate, I'm very proud of.
Yeah,
I'm very proud of it.
Yeah,
but I was tripping, and Lua, who's over the work that we do, or whose vision it was, the training I was in, was joking of like, y'all can come kiss the ring if you want to, but you were death doulas before you came here.
Ashe.
And so people were kind of asking of like, how many hours? So you're a death doula now. You were a death doula before you came here, and that's really powerful for me. And that's such a kind of seeing the parrot and coming to that kind of moment of wow.
Yeah.
And how much my time here has been like my calling and has been determined and predicated by a person or regents. Is that what they call them?
You're talking about UC?
The regents.
Yes.
Are these, whoever these forces are telling me I now can carry out my calling. Sure. I now can. And so I'm in this place of believing that I am free.
Mm.
I'm in a place of because I spent so much time fighting to be free,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know that I was free then too. And that were all those parrots. I didn't know that I was free during that time as well. And so now that I have that awareness that I've been free, and not to disregard the moments of capture that are always at play and the ways in which I am still captured. I'm all those things.
Yeah.
There's such a magical place to be in. I always like creating. I always like, but now in what I am back from a very particular type of death.
Mm-hmm.
And on this other side, and I mean, like, this, but listeners don't. I mean, days from this death. Like, we're only days out from a certain awareness and epiphany that I have that I have such a deep, newfound love and appreciation of life that and I'm not even articulate in the way that I want to be. It's felt, but I can't express it in the same ways that I would like to. But there is such a newness here that provides very different lenses for the ways in which I was understanding who I was and what I was a part of.
Can we apply some of those lenses to questions I have, I guess, around the work? Or does that sound like work?
It sounds scary, but because it's being recorded. But it's still that trauma of like, what will this translate to? I'm being vulnerable.
I'm like, the connection, right? Because most people would hear it. Even for me, there was somewhere back in my mind, some teacher, probably Mrs. Peck, third grade, somewhere back there. But what about, that got into me, saying, wow, people are probably going to hear this and say, I have such an appreciation for life. After you were talking about death work, first, that's a word we're probably new to.
Yeah.
All the stuff that we're talking about here is probably, those are discordant, musician, like the black and white keys right next to each other don't always sound like, but then you hear Thelonious Monk or whatever. It's
jazz.
Like, okay, that's fine, right? But it's discordant. And I'm interested in this because I look around and I feel like we're in a society, we were just talking about this, that's so fearful, disdainful of death. And yet people are moving us, pushing us into death, especially around school. And, we had these shootings that took place. The school years for us is just getting started. There are school shootings, feels like every other month.
Yeah.
There are, as we've said, like young people and their families leaving schools. There are educators leaving schools. And then there are young people who are feeling trapped inside schools who are leaving life. And I thought about this one that just happened, the school shooting where they're going to try the parent.
Yeah.
And they're like very serious about this. Contrast that with how many children has by relationship to what's happening, right, in Gaza, around how many children's lives have been lost. And so it's this really intense, taken, really intense, it's almost like the place is telling on itself in very overt ways, about how it feels about death. I think about that soldier who self-embalmed in front of the Capitol, and we just continue to move.
Yeah. And
I'm walking around looking at folks in our education spaces, wondering if we are inhabiting the same realm, but maybe not. Maybe according to what you're learning, we're not inhabiting the same realm, and that's part of the but maybe it's not the problem, but part of the discord that I'm experiencing. So I don't know if that's a question.
What's your question?
I'm just interested in what you make of death in our current space and in around schools, around education, around how you see people showing up.
I think it's very similar to how we wrote the piece. as beautiful as it is, I don't think in there was reverence. And, you know, Elua taught us that, like, you cannot, what's that, a toilet? The toilet flushes? Yeah, nice. You know, she taught us that.
Track that.
Oh, it's tracked. You know, she taught us that you cannot, you don't get what you get in our society when people revere death.
Okay.
You don't get that.
That was my
You smiling.
Well, my follow-up was, well, how would we, if you could take us through just even a practice, because we're moving into the podcast season. We're moving into, it feels like a new season in general of life.
Yes.
Some guidance around reverence for some of the death that we are experiencing. Because you said not all, what was that phrase? I want to take your fire. It's like, it's not a good death.
We don't get the excessive death.
Yeah.
We don't get the, you know, death is the one thing that ties everybody together.
Uh-huh.
We all getting out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the primary factor that accelerates excess death is fear of death.
Say that again.
The
primary factor
that accelerates and that greatly contributes to the excess death that you're speaking of, because death is so natural. A natural world, like that is, we have teachers around death and how to treat it, and its intimate relationship with life. It is vital. It is sacred. It is important. But when we get to come in and manipulate, when we get to come in and dictate who dies and how they die, that's when we start. That's not reverence. That's not deep respect. That's not admiration for the sacredness of what death is. Mm-hmm. Right? And the further and further that we are from that relationship, mm-hmm. the more readily we're going to see what we're seeing in our society, and we'll continue to. Mm-hmm. But what's been powerful in why I feel so drawn to that, I think that's what we were attempting to do in Apocalyptic Ed. And that's what we're attempting to do with the podcast. Slow down. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And sit in the reality of your own mortality. Mm-hmm. It is coming. It is here. You are dying right now. And so much of what we do, and we talked about this, whether it's with the body, right? We saw in this training what happens when you aren't embalmed. We saw what happens. I'm thinking about just walking around the continent, right? In Ghana, and how the smells got to me because I am not used to the reality of what things smell like when they die. Mm. And so much of the perfuming,
yes,
so much of the covering up of the reality and the power of death is what we do really well on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. Even Black folks, right? He sure looked good, right? It's like, what does that mean? It looked like they were still alive.
Yes.
The facade, the covering up, and the deeper and more intimate we can get. And I think that's what we're hoping to do with this season, is the more intimate we can get with death, with the sacred. I think that's where that rupture, there's the opportunity for that rupture. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be talking about it all season, but I think that's what I have to share today about it.
There's, so much wisdom in what you're offering for us about how to revere transition. And I know that we started by talking about maroon science that felt academic, but in truth, as you're talking, like, well, that's Winti, that's Mayal, that's Dekenga. Those are all these practices that our people have engaged. And in fact, the very circle that tied people together was a life circle that attended to death.
Yes.
In part because that was the practices that were syncretized that people brought with them.
Yeah.
And also because in many ways they were tied by a very peculiar and exorbitant relationship with death based on their exposure, excess of it, so that others could have more life.
Yes.
Right. So you put the excess of death graft onto our flesh so that others could have more life.
Yeah.
And it's where I think we've always landed, where we're kindred, or we have kinship with the earth in that way. Because I would say the same thing's happening, right? Graft excessive death onto our mother, so that we could have what we assume to be more life. And man, what would it look like to revere I'm thinking about a forest where I was walking through once, and a tree had fallen, but there was tree and life growing out of it. The earth does that so beautifully. And we do that as well.
Yes,
I mean, we have these beings that I know two of mine, one's got my eyes. I'm like, what the hell? But it's because I see that as like eventually or soon, right? Who knows? There will be fallen, and then there will be growth in life in that very overt way. But we do that with our words. I even see that with the peace. So I give us grace, even as we are 4 years on.
Yeah.
Because what's blossomed out of that ritual, and I would never trade. I'm so grateful.
Yes.
And even up to that point as well, I'm grateful for the insight and for the invitation. So I'm hopeful that this season will offer this. Might be a weird, I don't even know which camera to look at. Like, y'all in for some, like, stick with us though. So we'll be back after these messages. But I'm so grateful for this time. My goodness, right? 2025.
Yes.
And whatever yesterday was, I'm interested in how this conversation, but I trust it because it's spirit guided about where we're headed for this next moment.
Ashe to the stillness, to the slowness, to the sacred.
Ashe.
All right, y'all. Till next time.
Peace.
This podcast was brought to you by the Apocalyptic Education Network and the Institute for Regenerative Futures. It was filmed and recorded at Red Tone Records. Continue the conversation with me and Kenjus at apocalypticeducation.org.
Mommy?
Yes, Buddha.
All done.
Yeah, we're all done.